tourists will pay a few pounds for a ticket to Prague and go get drunk and then fly home. Is that really a good use for the fossil fuels that are stored inside the earth? Get used to it, because aviation is going to get more expensive. The idea that you can hop on a plane and fly to the other end of the continent for 20 pounds or whatever, that has to go away.
Lufthansa is joining the chorus of airline industry voices complaining about the cost of doing business at German airports. The CEO, in a recent interview with the newspaper Bild, stating the extreme rise in state costs for air transport is leading to a further decline in supply. More and more airlines are avoiding German airports or canceling important connections. Lufthansa is not alone with these concerns. Their subsidiary Eurowings is cutting routes, and so is the budget airline giant Ryanair. To talk more about the industry and how grounded it really is at the moment here in Germany, we're joined by the aviation journalist Jeff Wise. He's the host of the Finding MH370 podcast. Jeff, thanks for joining us. Lufthansa is the flag carrier airline here in Germany, but even that company is voicing concerns. What are the main sticking points right now?
Well, there's no denying that Germany has a lot of regulations and extra fees compared to some other countries, and this is anathema to a low-cost carrier. Ryanair being, of course, the giant in the room. So yes, and they're very aggressive and famously vocal about pushing for measures that will cut costs. They have some leverage given their size, and they would like to make flying as cheap as possible. They have a lot of headwinds. One of them being these measures, these regulations and fees, which are, I think, come downstream from ecologists' concerns about global warming.
Yeah, the industry complaints for operating here out of Germany are many, but here are some of the concerns that we're hearing from Lufthansa and other big operators in the country. One was this 19% increase to taxes per passenger here. That tax increase went into effect in May of this year. There are also plans to require a certain amount of synthetic fuels in the future, also known as e-fuels. They're more environmentally friendly, but expensive. Lastly, the airport fees, talking about things like charges for security checks and air traffic controls. Jeff, how does Germany stack up against other countries? Is Germany charging too much?
Well, it is true that it charges more. Of course, the key point is what is too much. Climate activists would point out that there are significant externalities associated with aviation, not least the carbon that gets put into the atmosphere with every flight. Ryanair would like to have very cheap flights. Famously, British tourists will pay a few pounds for a ticket to Prague and go get drunk and then fly home. Is that really a good use for the fossil fuels that are stored inside the earth? And so that's really, it's going to be a debate. Are they too high? Are they not high enough? If synthetic aviation fuels become mandated this is essentially where the industry says it wants to be by 2050 with zero net carbon emissions, then the costs of aviation are going to be significantly higher even than they are now. So Germany might just be ahead of the curve.
What kind of signal would it send? We don't know for sure that this would happen yet, but if Lufthansa was to reduce routes to and from Germany, its home country, what kind of signal would that send?
I think it would send a signal that they're serious about taking matters into their hands. Now, Germany has been at the forefront in some of these, I would say, ecological political measures, including, getting rid of nuclear power at the time that they did. Now, that, of course, was rather contrary to the aims of climate change activists, but at the same time, it shows how seriously Germany takes its environmental responsibilities.
Now, the International Air Transport Association, which represents the world's airlines, came out at the time against that increased passenger tax that I mentioned, saying it would weaken the economy and hamper decarbonization. In a quote, the IATA's Director General said, "When Germany's economic performance is anemic at best, denting its competitiveness with more taxes on aviation is policy madness. The government should be prioritizing measures to improve Germany's competitive position and encouraging trade and travel. Instead, they have gone for a short-term cash grab, which can only damage the economy's long-term growth. Jeff, harsh words. What do you make of this point that as goes the German aviation sector, so goes the economy?
Well, of course, you know, a consortium of airlines is going to complain about measures that make their industry more expensive and generating less revenue. I don't understand the logic of saying that increasing fees, decreasing traffic is going to harm decarbonization. Look, at the end of the day, if we're going to prevent the climate from heating up, we're going to have to stop burning fossil fuels. And aviation is the industry, probably among all industries, which is hardest to decarbonize. So the easiest way, and really in some respects the only way to cut carbon emissions from airlines, is to cut traffic. Now, will that harm the German economy? I mean, I guess maybe. I think it's different from something like steel tariffs, where steel is an input that you need to make many things, for instance. Whereas, do people need to travel by air? I mean, one of the things that eco-activists would like to see is more rail travel. Let's have more high-speed rail. Of course, you guys in Europe are a million years ahead of us in America, where we find it hard to even build a subway track. But that is, of course, an argument they're going to make. Whether it's valid, I think maybe deserves a second look.
One figure that I can't quite get my head around yet, or how to interpret it, and I'm hoping you can help me, is that Germany really hasn't bounced back to pre-pandemic airline passenger numbers. What do you make of that? Is that just more rail travel, or how should we think about that number?
There are so many factors affecting a number like that. It seems simple, but I mean, just today, for instance, as Ryanair is complaining about German fees and regulations, Michael O'Leary, the Ryanair CEO, just today was complaining that they weren't getting enough planes from Boeing. I mean, this is a whole completely unrelated problem that world aviation is having, which is that Boeing seems to be really screwing up on an epic scale and just kind of falling on their face for no obvious reason. So Boeing's problems with mismanagement basically are reducing their output of planes, which means that Ryanair doesn't have the capacity that it thought it would have, and so it has too many employees and too many other associated costs. So they have that whole other issue. And so I think it's somewhat simplistic to say that Germany's failure to bounce back economically after the pandemic is solely due to this cause or that cause. So I will punt on that question.
You mentioned Ryanair. Another budget airline here in Europe is Eurowings. They're, of course, the subsidiary of Lufthansa. And they've already announced that they're cutting routes with 1,000 fewer flights planned for Hamburg in 2025. A spokesman from Hamburg Airport told DW that those flights account for less than 1% of their total. But Jeff, what does the reduction by Eurowings tell you?
Well, it tells me that perhaps it's a clue rather than maybe something utterly dispositive, but it's a clue that the environment is getting tough for budget carriers. Now, the aviation industry historically is an extremely volatile one, and as economic conditions decline or improve, you get quite radical swings in the profitability of different parts of the industry. Ryanair has been a money printing machine at times. If we're going to get into an environment where aviation fuel is necessarily much more expensive than it is today, then it's going to be tough to operate as a carrier whose economic premise is like, give us some of your pocket change and you can fly anywhere in Europe. That might be hard to sustain.
Yeah, speaking of course, the longtime vocal critic of the German government, Ryanair, announcing cuts already for next year. The smaller German cities of Dortmund, Dresden, and Leipzig will see Ryanair service axed altogether. Meanwhile, Hamburg will see a reduction of service with 60% fewer Ryanair flights, while here in Berlin, we can expect 20% fewer. Jeff, what should we make of these Ryanair cuts across Germany?
Well, as you said earlier, I mean, yes, they're going to have a big impact on those particular cities. But if you look at the overall picture, percentage-wise, it's going to be a fairly small change. air service is constantly shifting. They're constantly adjusting their routes. And, we're now in an era of dynamic pricing where what are you going to charge? It depends. 5 minutes from now, it's going to be different from what it is today, from right now, I mean, and it could be different for somebody like 20 miles away from what it is for me. I mean, we don't even know. We, as the consumer, we're very much in the dark as to like what the actual economic conditions are. Don't forget that these big industry players are always going to squawk when regulations get imposed on them. They're always going to squawk when fees get imposed. They're going to say that the sky is falling. And if I would say there's a big difference between a percentage reduction in capacity, a percentage increase in price, and the sky falling. I mean, listen, really. If somebody might have to get on a, I mean, you're in Germany, right? You can get on a train and go to the next big airport. It's not that far.
Yeah, squawking, your word, not mine. But the Ryanair Group CEO, Eddie Wilson, had some choice words for the German government's policies.
So this is sort of a microcosm of the decision-making of an airline that has an investment of about $3.1 billion in aircraft in Germany. And if the taxes in Germany are 2 or 3 times what they are elsewhere, well, then you're going to allocate those resources elsewhere. And the government have done nothing except to put additional taxes on.
Now, Jeff, something that has come to mind for me, that these fees, which here in Germany are between about 15 euros and about 70 euros, if these fees are higher, why not just pass that along to customers who can then make a cost-based decision? Why cut routes?
Well, I think their calculation is that if they do pass on those costs to customers, there will be fewer customers, that sort of price elasticity. And then they won't be able to sustain the service. That's what they're saying. I mean, are they being fully on the up and up? I keep coming back to this idea that get used to it because aviation is going to get more expensive. The idea that you can hop on a plane and fly to the other end of the continent for 20 pounds or whatever, that has to go away. We have a weird political situation here in the United States where everyone seems convinced that the main thing that will determine whether an incumbent president gets back into power is whether gas is expensive or not. At the same time, everyone's, swearing up and down that they take climate change desperately seriously. Those two ideas are completely at odds. You cannot switch from fossil fuels to renewable energy such as it exists today without imposing a cost on yourself. And so you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want to have the temperature of the earth not soar to unacceptable levels, you're going to have to pay more for things like air tickets. Air travel is a very carbon emitting business. And we're going to have to deal with it. So I think in a sense that we should recognize that this conversation is at one level fundamentally quite silly.
Jeff Wise, aviation journalist, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.